Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the book of Genesis. In today's reading, we've got a lot going on with Abraham and God keeping his covenant with him, so let's get right into it. Now, Abraham is going to settle in a land called Gerar, okay, that's how we're going to pronounce it, Gerar, which was ruled by a king named Abimelech. Abraham was afraid of him, and for some reason he tells him, just as he told Pharaoh and Sarah, just as he told Pharaoh before him, sorry, getting ahead of myself, that Sarah was his sister. Now, Sarah is a beautiful woman, so I guess this is just his go-to line so people don't kill him and take her from him. But it's actually not quite a whole lie. It's kind of one of those half-truths here because we learn in this chapter, verse 12 in particular, that Sarah is in fact his sister. Not full sister, they have the same father. So now, when he does this, God still protects them even after his showing another lack of faith. On both occasions, the sin of taking another man's wife brings suffering on the ruler's people. And it seems a little unfair for the rulers because they don't know that they're doing anything wrong. This woman is just coming in there because Abraham has said that, oh, this is my sister. And okay, well, she's mine then. Okay, maybe that's not the greatest thing either. But so they're being judged for this, and they don't even know that she's Abraham's actual wife. But God judges their people for this. And both times, the ruler comes to Abraham, and Abraham apologizes and explains his lie. And it's interesting that Abraham still hasn't learned from that first mistake since he goes back and does the exact same thing again. But how many of us are like that? How many of us have made a mistake, and then we just kind of go back and do it again, expecting a different result? Maybe we thought that, oh, this blew up in my face last time, but it won't this time. Now I've got it figured out. Come on. How many of us have done the same thing over and over again, even though we know better, we know we shouldn't? I think probably, if we're honest, a lot of us have been there. And that's what Abraham is doing here. And so why do I bring that up? I bring that up because it shows us that Abraham is still human, okay? He is this great man of faith. His faith was counted to him as righteousness, but he was still human. He still made mistakes. And he was afraid, and that fear led him to this same old lie. In the end, though, he is saved by the forgiveness of God and the generous understanding of this pagan ruler that he was afraid of in the beginning. Then we get to chapter 21, where we have the birth of Isaac. This was a miracle, really, because both Abraham and Sarah were very old. Sarah was around 90 years old, and Abraham was around 100. But God was upholding his covenant with Abraham. And now once Isaac is born, Sarah doesn't like Ishmael being there since she wanted Isaac to be the sole heir. And Abraham has to send him away. He doesn't want to do it, but God tells him to go ahead because it is through Isaac that God will uphold his covenant with him. So Abraham sends away, with great sadness, he sends away Ishmael and Hagar. And as they're gone away, God speaks to Hagar, and he actually promises her that he will take care of them. Because Hagar, if you read this account, make sure you do, make sure you're reading, Hagar puts her son down, and she's worried that Ishmael is not going to survive, and God says, I'm going to take care of you. After that episode, though, Abraham's power continues to increase. So he makes a treaty with Abimelech. We've seen that even though Abimelech doesn't serve God, he does respect him. And Abraham as well, since he has given him permission to live there on his land. Now Abraham had dug this well, but Abimelech's men came and seized it. And they make a covenant here that it would belong to Abraham. And they name the place Beersheba, which means well of seven or well of the oath. He plants a tree and then worships God there. And this will actually be important because it'll be important both to Abraham and Isaac because it will end up marking the southern border of the promised land. So then we come to what is hopefully a familiar story in chapter 22. God tests Abraham's faith by telling him to go sacrifice his son. Now, child sacrifice is forbidden by God, so clearly he wouldn't make Abraham go through with it. But he tests him this way all the same. Abraham takes Isaac up to the mountain. He prepares everything to sacrifice his son until God thankfully intervenes. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was Isaac and I knew I was going to sacrifice something and I saw my dad preparing the altar, I saw the knife, I saw something is getting ready to be sacrificed, I'm looking around, Dad, I think we forgot something. But Abraham was just being faithful to God, and God, thankfully for Abraham's sake, and as we knew he would, intercedes. And this is a pretty curious episode because people may wonder why God would even test Abraham in this way. Since God knows all, and he surely knows that Abraham would be faithful, right? God is omnipotent. He knows everything. He's all powerful. Omniscient means he knows everything. Yes. And so he knows how Abraham's going to react. So why would he even bother with this whole charade? Well, I like Tony Evans' explanation of this, and listen to this. He says, God knows everything factual and potential. He hasn't, however, experienced everything he knows. For example, he knows about sin, but he's never experienced committing sin, and he never will. God has not yet experienced Abraham's obedience. He delights in experiencing what he already knows to be the case, just as a wife delights in experimenting the love that her husband proclaims. God wants to feel our commitment. And so that's why he became a man. He became a man so that he could sympathize with our weakness. So when God provided the sacrifice, Abraham's faith had passed its test. And in the future, this very mountain will be a very important mountain, as it is where Solomon will one day build his great temple. And today, Abraham's rock is actually covered by the Dome of the Rock, which is a mosque in Jerusalem. It's near here that God will eventually offer his son Jesus as a sacrifice for the sins of the world. And this chapter wraps up with a little quick genealogy of a man named Nahor. And there's one name in there that should stick out, and that is Rebekah. And we will find out very soon why, maybe even next week. So then we come to chapter 23. In this chapter, we see the death of Sarah, Abraham's beloved wife. She died at 127 years old. So not only had she been able to have a child at 90, God had also given her another 37 years to watch him grow. And remember, every aspect of life is in God's hands. When Sarah was turning 90, I'm sure she was thinking that her life was about over. She wasn't thinking that she was going to have a child and she was going to watch him grow up for 37 years. But she did, because God has a plan, and God's will is what really matters. And then we have a long exchange with Abraham about buying a plot of land to bury Sarah. And you may be wondering, why is this so important? Why are we watching Abraham haggle with this guy over some land? Well, the short story is, this is the promised land. This is what will one day be the promised land. And if he had accepted the land as a gift, he wouldn't own it long term. He would just have this gift as a place to bury his wife, and then that's it. But in negotiating a fair sale, Abraham actually now owns some of the land in the promised land. And this actually ends up being the only piece of the promised land that Abraham ever owns in his lifetime. So that is all for today. I'll see you tomorrow in the book of Judges.